Sometimes when people think career breaks, it's this far off goal. Like, I would love to do this. I would love to take time off and travel the world. That would be nice. It's sort of a one-day approach. And so this list here are all things that you could start doing today. And if you follow through on it, then it can make it more tangible and make it a reality.
That is Cali O'Connor. She is a career break coach, and she is our guest today, here to share 5 steps to help you plan your first or next career break today. That's the key. Things you can do today. Of course, we get into the bigger topic of travel. She shares plenty of advice. You can learn more about her work over at travelshifters.com. She's a former chemical engineer who traded her career in the oil field for a life-changing adventure of quitting her job to travel around the world for 2 years. And as she says on her website, you may need a career break if you feel stuck at a job you despise, you're burnt out and overwhelmed climbing the corporate ladder, you're going through the 9-to-5 motions, living for the weekend, you dream about packing up and traveling the world, and you use all your vacation time traveling and you wish you had more. If any of that resonates with you, then this is definitely the show for you. And although a career break can kind of feel like a far-off thing, perhaps even unattainable, this conversation is going to make it attainable. You're going to get these 5 practical steps today. You're also going to get travel advice to help you save time and money on the road, how she conquered early onset travel burnout.
So for the first few months, it was really good. Just changing cities every few days. It was fine. And then several months in, I got to a point where I would be in a new city and I'm like, I don't really feel like doing anything. I'm traveling. I'm supposed to be happy. Why do I feel like this?
You'll hear that along with some of the biggest mistakes she made during her first career break and how you can avoid them. We love learning from other people's mistakes so you don't have to make the same ones. How to overcome fear and financial concerns, setting goals and determining when you should come back, and loads more. I'll also wrap it up with what I would consider a quote to live by. It's all happening right now in this show. So buckle up, strap in. Thanks for being here, and welcome to the Zero to Travel podcast, my friend.
You're listening to the Zero to Travel podcast, where we explore exciting travel-based work, lifestyle, and business opportunities, helping you to achieve your wildest travel dreams. And now your host, world wanderer and travel junkie, Jason Moore.
Hey, it's Jason here with ZeroToTravel.com. Welcome to the show, my friend. Thanks for hanging out, letting me bring a little travel into your ears today. This is the show to help you travel the world on your terms, to fill your life with as much travel as you desire, no matter what your situation or experience. And another thing to consider, as I welcome you to the show about career breaks, which is our big topic today, is sometimes we just need a pause in what we're doing to perhaps reassess our actual career. That's something I didn't talk about at the top of the show there. We were talking about maybe being burnt out from your job and feel like you're going through the motions. And all of that is lifestyle related and perhaps career related, but perhaps not. You can feel like you're going through the motions, but still love your job and live for the weekend, even though you love your job. For some people, a career break is also going to be a chance to not just take a break to travel, but really to reassess what direction they want to go in their careers, in their work. And that might mean it's going in the same direction and they realize they love what they do and they want to keep staying and working in that industry. It might mean they even get their boss to agree to hold a job for them. We talk about that in this conversation as well. Like, how do you talk to your boss or your employer about this? And Cali shares her experience with that conversation. Or it might just mean a complete reassessment of your lifestyle and your work and everything. I mean, you never know what travel is going to do to your brain, to your life. And there's only one way to find out, and that's by going and doing it. And we'll give you all the tools to get started on that today. You know, it's funny, Cali also works in a hostel as the general manager. So, of course, I had to get her number one tip for booking hostels and get a little bit of the behind-the-scenes look at a hostel life, which is surely filled with lots of, shall we say, interesting stories. Let's get into it, shall we? Stick around on the back end. I will share that quote to live by, which I just shared in my newsletter, by the way, which is free. Have you signed up for it over at zerototravel.com/newsletter? All you have to do is go over there and just put your email in, your best email, and you'll get my weekly newsletter. And it's fun to keep in touch over there, and you'll hear about all the exciting things going on off the pod is what I meant to say. All right. Without further ado, here's my conversation with Cali. Thanks for listening. Thanks for being a part of this community. And I'll see you on the other side, my friend. Cheers. Cali O'Connor, welcome to the Zero to Travel podcast, my friend. So nice to have your smiling face here.
It's so nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
You're one person making a bit of noise in the career break space, which we're going to talk about today. I've done episodes on it in the past. It seems like it's a topic that anytime I bring it up, it's well received in terms of like either people are like considering one or maybe they've done one. Maybe it's like a new idea to them. Either way, it's something that resonates and it makes sense. I mean, as travelers, the idea of like taking time off to travel, but then I want to get your thoughts on this because you could say, okay, well, this is just semantics. This is just terminology. What you're really doing is quitting your job to travel. But when you say it's a career break, it is how you frame it too. And I think like a career break sounds a little softer, maybe a little more accessible, maybe like, oh, I'm not throwing everything away to travel. Like I'm just taking a break to kind of assess. So what are your thoughts around that?
I totally agree. And it's such a good point because it sort of matters what your intention is behind this. Are you quitting your job to travel? And so literally that's how I approached my first one and sort of reframed it after the fact. But we need rest as people. And as travelers, it's so important to like actually have time to get to know a place. And so through taking time away from work and spending years traveling, you have a completely different perspective. And then you can go back to the workforce refreshed if that's what you choose to do. Or you can take what you learned about yourself and do something completely different. So it's a break. It's not sustainable to do it forever. So like by definition, it's a break.
Yeah. Like you said, the intention, that's what matters. And it opens things up in a different way. And so have you taken multiple career breaks, first of all, or just one?
I have.
Big one? Yeah. Okay.
So yes, it started with the one big one. And then I went into a second smaller one. And that's sort of when I started getting intentional about like, okay, so I'm on this nonlinear path. And in the second one, like I did remote work a little bit and there are other pieces, but like my first one was straight up, no responsibilities, just travel. And I think that's an experience that every adult should have, like really getting away from those adult responsibilities if possible.
What you just said with a nonlinear path, I kind of I want you to expand on that because when I'm a visual thinker. So when I think about a career break, I like see a line and I see a gap in the line where you're traveling and then the line continues. But you said nonlinear journey, and I'm wondering why you use that terminology.
Yes. So I kind of use that when describing my career because by trade, I'm a chemical and biomolecular engineer. That's what my degree is in. That's what I studied. I had industry jobs after I graduated from college. And then I took this career break. And then that prompted me to go back to work, but in a completely different field. So that's sort of where the nonlinear comes from. And then after spending time in a different area, which was really prompted by taking that career break and my love of travel, I left and went back to engineering for a teeny tiny short stint and then ended up leaving again. So it's a little bit disjointed, but the reality is it kind of all makes sense based on my personality and my skill set.
Yeah. All right. So how long did you study to become a chemical biomolecular engineer?
It's funny that they really make you choose a career path when you're 18 years old. And so I liked math. I liked science, and I wanted to earn as much money as possible upon graduation without having to go to grad school. So that was the rationale at the time. And honestly, like, even though I'm not chemical engineering today, it served me quite well because all skills are transferable. No education is wasted.
We just got to pull that out again. Like all skills are transferable. No education's wasted. I mean, that is so important. We talk about it time and again on the show, but I think like if somebody's listening and they're thinking I'm in a job I don't like, or like this, or this thing's not serving me, this isn't getting me anywhere towards my goals. And I've said this before, you just never know how those skills you're gaining, because you're gaining skills from everything you do and experience. You never know how that's going to play into your life later on. You just don't know. It sounds, even if you're doing janitorial work or something, like those skills that you're learning, whether it's the people skills or the management, whatever, like it just comes into play and you never know how. Oh, I like your rationale in the beginning. You're like, I want to just not go to grad school, but make as much money. I mean, that's not terrible rationale when you didn't know what you were going to do.
I'm kind of proud of myself for thinking like that as a teenager.
Right. Still a lot of hard work going into that. So bringing that into your journey to your first career break, was that a struggle for you to kind of be like, I've been working so hard to get to this point, and now I have this job, and I did the whole educational thing, and now I have a good paying job, and am I really just going to throw this all away? Like, that's the first thought I think where people have, and we can get into the tips and everything shortly, but just for you, for your personal journey, what did that period of time look like for you when you were making the decision and what you wanted to do? What did that look like for you personally?
So for me, I was so burnt out in my job that I was willing to throw it all away. I was so done. However, in like a lot of things that I talk about are hindsight reflections because I couldn't see it at the time. I didn't realize how closely my identity was tied to my job and engineering and achieving and validation in the workplace. So it was an interesting struggle when, like, it was an amazing feeling to quit, to have freedom, to do whatever I wanted, to see amazing places all over the world. But then what I found myself doing and didn't realize at the time was like approaching travel with an achiever mindset. So that kind of everyone thought I made the right decision. So, oh, look, she's in all these cool places and doing all these cool things. Like, yes, that's the right decision. And so, I mean, at that point, I wasn't really traveling for myself. I was doing the same thing I was doing at work, kind of trying too hard and burning myself out.
Let everybody know, first of all, how long were you doing the job? How long was the career break? And kind of what did that trip look like? And then we can dig in a little more into the mindset stuff.
Sure. So the job that I'm referring to that caused all this burnout was about 4 years. I was working in the oil field in Texas, and it was just really demanding. It's a 24/7 business. I would get phone calls all day and all night. I started by actually like working out in the field on oil rigs. So it was demanding. And so then my career break ended up being over 2 years. I reached the point where I'm like, I can't do this anymore. I can't see myself doing any other job in this company. So I'm going to quit. And that's what I did.
And that was an around the world journey, or did you go to one specific continent, or what was the plan?
That's a funny question. And that is something I like to talk about when planning a career break as well. It was around the world, and it wasn't in any, again, linear fashion. It was very disjointed. I probably flew across the world back and forth several times. It was not organized, and it's not the most recommendable way to travel the world.
Okay, that's cool. So, well, we're going to learn from your mistakes, 100%. Or your quote unquote mistakes, if you want to call them mistakes. I'm sure there was some serendipity and some things that happened that were amazing that wouldn't have happened if you didn't do it that way. But we'll call them mistakes because we need to put a label on them here for the conversation. But, all right. So how long do you think it took to kind of break free of that achiever mindset that you mentioned, like where you could really settle into the trip and start getting on the break, so to speak? Because you mentioned being burned out and then going into another burnout situation with travel. And oftentimes I think, like, I don't know. We haven't talked about this too much on the show, this idea where there certainly can be a moment in travel if you're on the road for a long time when you're getting burned out, but you're saying this was kind of maybe a bit even earlier on in the journey and you had to kind of settle into the trip. So is that correct? And how did you kind of break free from that?
Yeah. So, I mean, it started kind of running on adrenaline. You know, I was so excited. I'm doing the coolest thing ever. And so for the first few months, it was really good. Just changing cities every few days. It was fine. And then several months in, I got to a point where I would be in a new city and I'm like, I don't really feel like doing anything. I'm traveling. I'm supposed to be happy. Why do I feel like this? And I couldn't figure it out. I did not have the self-awareness at that time that I have now. But honestly, it took probably 8 months for me to be like, oh, it's the speed in which you're doing things. And if you are traveling full time, that's your life and you're still a person. So not every day is going to be perfect and you're not going to be happy every single day. You still have these human emotions you're dealing with because this is your life now. So it took longer than I would have wanted it to, but definitely grateful to have been able to figure that out. And then towards the end of my career break, I started slowing down and spending. That's when I started falling in love with slow travel and what that brings.
Personally, I wouldn't even think of that as a mistake, as more like that was just part of the process for you, like part of the journey that you had to go through.
Right. I agree. It's a lesson that I needed to learn, and not just for my travel life, for my everyday life, everything I do. It's like, oh, it's me. I'm the problem here. And now that I have the awareness and I'm learning it in different facets of my life, I can address it.
Have you heard the saying, wherever you go, there you are?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's kind of like one of those situations, right? But I think this is where the power of the intention behind whatever it is, the gap year, the break, the career break, or the pause for travel, however you want to frame it, it can mean a lot of different things to a lot of people, right? Like for some people, a career break might mean I'm taking a break to reassess what I might want to do with my life. For others, it might literally just be a break from their job that they want to come back to, that they love. For others, it might be a time to just assess who they are or their place in the world, whatever. Like, can mean a lot of that. And that's what is beautiful about the idea, I think. But wherever you go, there you are. Going back to that, it's like travel can't help but kind of slap you in the face with some things, right? Like as like when you said when the adrenaline wears off, you're still there. And then it's like, all right, well, how do what's going on here?
Exactly.
Do you want to get into these tips, and then maybe we can pull out some of your personal story or maybe you got some personal examples to go with some of these? I'm not sure. I haven't seen this list or anything, but we were kind of talking about the episode before recording, and I said it would be really cool since you are a career break coach. Did you just design your own career? Are you just like, hey, I've done enough of these, I can help other people with this? How did you end up falling into the career break coach space, I guess?
So, I mean, that happened during the pandemic. And this, again, contributes to the nonlinear career path, in which I'm like, I love traveling. I'd like to keep doing this. I was working a contract job during COVID, which ended. And I'm like, okay, now what? And I always had this belief that starting a business meant like you needed to go on Shark Tank and have $1 million idea and all of these things. But through taking the pandemic to like read and learn and listen to podcasts, I'm like, oh, you can actually just turn your experience and knowledge into something that can help other people. And so it took many iterations, but that's kind of how I got there.
And are you coaching people actively right now?
Actively, I am not. Funny enough, but within the past 6 months, I've gone back to work in a very aligned career job. So again, that's sort of like the beauty of life and the non-linearness. And I attribute all of it to my career break because right now I am managing a hostel in Boston. And part of the appeal for them was that I talked about staying in hundreds of hostels during my career break. So I have that experience from a guest standpoint, but also the operational experience.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's do the tips, and then we're going to get into some juicy hostel gossip. Okay.
Oh boy.
Because I know you got some stories.
Oh, do I?
All right. Well, where should we start here? Do you want to just kick it off with your number one? I don't know if you have these prioritized in order of how people should start planning, or
sure.
You can tell us about the list you put together, why you put it together this way, and then we can get into it.
Absolutely. I'm going to give a little bit of a preface, because sometimes when people think career breaks, it's this far off goal. Like, I would love to do this. I would love to take time off and travel the world. That would be nice. It's sort of a one-day approach. And so this list here are all things that you could start doing today. And if you follow through on it, then it can make it more tangible and make it a reality. So
love that.
And it's necessary. And so the very first step might seem obvious, but it's really important. And I think it's the step a lot of people miss, the ones that say, oh, I would love to do that one day. And it's making the decision. So if you don't say, I am going to do this, it is very likely not going to happen. And the example I like to use is like, I think I'd like to go to the gym tomorrow morning. If you're non-committal at night, you're not waking up early to go to the gym in the morning. And it's the same with planning this career break. You need a decision is not, oh, I would like to, I want to, one day I could do that. It's, I'm doing it. And so that's the decision. And that's step number one.
Okay. Love it.
And then from there, this one I find really important, and it's something that I personally did not do in my career break. And I'm glad we already talked about how I was traveling so quickly and stuff like that. But I think it's important to define why you want to do this and have a really solid why, an intention a little bit deeper than just, oh, I want to see the world. Because, you know, I wanted to see the world. If you're not thinking about this intentionally, you're kind of just running from your subconscious patterns. And so for me, like not actually thinking about why I was doing this, it turned into like this competition with myself, seeing how much I could see, which ended up leading to burnout. But yeah, if you really think about like, maybe it's related to your job. Like maybe you're doing this because you need this break. And like the way I encourage people to get to a really deep why is so like give your initial reason and then add so that at the end to really go deeper. So if you start with, I want to travel the world so that I can get to know cultures that are different than me, so that I can become a more understanding human. I don't know, so on and so forth. And it's really personal, but you can get deeper by just asking better questions.
First of all, I love that you're saying you could do this today, you know, and then you could sit down with I always love the go to a coffee shop or whatever, tea, whatever your poison is, you know, with the good old fashioned pen and paper and just have at it.
Yes, you know? I'm the same. You never know what's going to come out from pen and paper. You think you know, and you don't.
Right. All right. So what was before we move on to the third step, what was your so that for going back to a career and working in a hostel?
Yeah, that's a great question. And honestly, it was a little bit of shift in priorities. So in my most recent travels, my dad ended up getting sick and was in the hospital, and I came home to be his caretaker. And having a life event like that sort of made me reassess my proximity to my family. And so in order to live in an expensive city like Boston, it got to a point where I'm like, okay, I think some stability is needed in terms of income and things like that, while still maintaining what I love to do. And I get to talk to people from all over the world every day. So I get to be near my family and still travel through them. So it works out.
Yeah. Yeah. You still get to be around the whole travel scene. Mm-hmm. And I'm so sorry to hear that. Is your dad doing okay?
Yeah, he's great now. You would have never known.
Great. All right. So we are making the decision, defining your why. Mm-hmm. What's next?
Also, I recommend setting a goal. So this is a little bit different from your why, but it's a little bit different from your why, but it's kind of important to, while not dwell on it, think about possible steps for the other side of your break so that you are stepping out in the right direction. So if you know you're taking a break and you do want to go back to a career job afterwards, you might approach your break differently than if you're like, this is it, I'm leaving corporate forever. So, or a goal could be as simple as like, when I come back, I'm going to be fluent in Spanish. Things like that, just having a little bit of direction, and it's going to change over the course of your break because you're going to change and things are going to happen, but we don't want to start in the completely wrong direction.
And of course, through your travel experience, like you said, you're going to change so that you could still go in with the goal of coming back to your career, but then, 10 months later, it'd be like, what was I thinking? There's no way I'm going back to this. It does make sense that is different than your why. Yeah, well, I mean, in terms of setting goals, let's talk about goal setting for a minute, because this is another one of those, I don't want to say a hot topic, like some people just think that, well, that's what I do. I set goals and I go after them, and that's how you can achieve things. And others are like, oh, don't set goals. You're just setting yourself up for failure. You're setting yourself up for disappointment, because most people overestimate the things that they can do. And then it's like, oh, there's all this psychology around goal setting. I'm just wondering what your thoughts are around goal setting.
Yeah. For me, a goal is really more to like set you off in the right direction, whether you achieve it or not, because I've had goals. And then when I achieve them, I go through this funk that I'm like, okay, now what? Or like you set something and it's like, oh, that's, like, I don't know. It's just, I think, a landmark kind of. So you go in that direction knowing that you might reach it, you might not, or you might change directions completely, but at least like you're on a tangible path from the get-go.
Yeah. Cool. That makes sense. Have you heard about SMART goals, the acronym SMART goals?
Sure have.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so that just for people listening, it's an acronym for SMART, SMART, of course, specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. That's such a great framework for setting a goal, I think. Particularly achievable.
Right. Because, when you're not setting yourself up for success, you're kind of just setting yourself up to be a little bit discouraged.
Right. Okay. So what's the next step?
Okay. So time bound is a good segue because the last two are based on time. And so the next one is when. Pick a date and do your best to stick to it. Because if we just say next year, like that's 12 months, it could be anytime. It's not measurable if we're going to be talking about the SMART goals. So you actually need to do your best to pick a time frame and stick to it, keeping in mind what you need to accomplish between now and then. So if you have $0 in your bank account and you need money, your when might be a little bit further off. But if you're in a financially sound position, you have savings that could go towards taking a career break, then you can move it a little bit closer and don't let fear stand in your way, because basically, you're going to be able to accomplish what you need to do in the time you allow for it.
Okay. Yeah. Parkinson's law.
Mm-hmm. That's the one.
The work fills the amount of time you give it, or something along those lines. I'm not articulating it properly, but you get the idea. Like if you give yourself 3 months, it'll take 3 months. If you give yourself 2 weeks, it'll take 2 weeks. Like there's a lot of truth in Parkinson's law. I think there can be a lot of, okay, I want to be a millionaire. I have two weeks to do it. I mean, maybe that's a stretch. I don't know. But generally speaking, and we've all experienced this, right? Like the homework's due and it takes 2 weeks to write the paper. And if it's due the next day, you get it done the next day. It's just, yeah. So it is good to have, I agree with like the time constraints help. Did you have any accountability with your decision? Because sometimes having that outside person to kind of push you or just like hold you accountable to your decision is super helpful. Have you ever used that technique before?
I did something a little bit different. Like I was pretty solidly committed. I got to a place where I'm like, I cannot work another day here. So it's happening. But also before I left my job, I booked a non-refundable trip to Africa. So that kind of held me accountable as well.
Nice. Okay. The good old fashioned non-refundable trip. That'll keep you dedicated, right?
Definitely.
Just like, no going back from this now. Awesome. Okay. And final step, you mentioned it was time related as well.
It is. And so a lot of times when people are like, okay, I'm doing this career break, I want to go for as long as possible. Okay, that's great. But that is also really hard to plan for, especially if you need to save money and budget. So I recommend setting a minimum time that you're going to go on this break that would feel good to you. So that once you reach that time frame, whether it's 1 month, 2 months, 6 months, 1 year, you can reassess at that point and see if you do want to keep going. Because, sometimes you're like, that was great. I'm good. I'm ready to go back. Or you're like, no, this is the best thing ever. I must find a way to keep going. But in terms of funds and planning, if you just have something tangible to plan for, then you can reassess and take those next steps as you're approaching that time frame.
Nice list. Good job, Cali.
Thank you.
I mean, again, because this is, like you said, this all can be done today.
Mm-hmm.
All of these 5 things, make the decision, define your why, set a goal for when you are going to come back. What are you going to have accomplished? One thing at least, right? When are you leaving? And how much time are you going for? I like how you said it, that minimum amount of time that for the break that feels good to you. That's all of those things make it real. So, I mean, anybody listening now can just take that and make it real today. So thanks for that. That's awesome. Can I get a little more advice around some of the other particulars? And I don't want to put people off by asking these questions, because I think if they just do these 5 things today, they're going to get a lot of momentum right out of the gates. And that's really super exciting. And that's what it's all about. And this show is about helping people travel. So bam, there you go. You don't want to think too much about some of the fearful things coming down the road. Maybe you just want to sketch this out for yourself. But some of those things that might be challenging down the road, for example, let's start with the financial stuff. Like, do you recommend people have an emergency fund for they come back? How do you kind of dig into the financial stuff? Is there any sort of rules of thumb or best practices or advice you can share around the financial side of things?
Sure. So a lot of it has to do with who you are as a person. Some people are pretty risk averse and others are like, yeah, I'm going to Thailand with $100 in my pocket. I'm not the latter. So I do recommend having a buffer available. So you don't need to, the thing is, people think that they need to plan every aspect of their trip and sort of make sure that they have the funds to cover all this, from the hotel to the food to the activities and stuff like that. And you don't need to do it like that, because the thing is, again, you're going to start traveling, you're going to change the things that you budgeted for. You're like, nah, I've already seen 105 churches. I don't need to do this tour or that tour. So I recommend kind of researching the places. First of all, stick to a region. So you don't want to fly across the world like I did multiple times. That is a budget suck. So pick a region, research the area, get average costs for everything. And I always recommend working backwards. How much do you feel comfortable spending per month versus I'm going to add everything up and see if I can do it? Because when you're coming from this place of comfort, you're more in control. It's your decision. I would love to spend $2,000 a month on this career break. So then you just decide, you can pick places that are going to make it work. And maybe you can work backwards and just see if it's going to fit your budget versus, oh my gosh, I want to do all of these things and it's going to cost me $10,000 this month and that's unattainable. And so now I'm not going to go.
I mean, travelers want to go to a lot of different places, right? And it might be that, Southeast Asia is on your list, but Europe is maybe at the top, but maybe you kick it off in Southeast Asia because that's what your budget permits, for example. Yeah,
exactly. And then just one other little thing I like to add. I personally don't once I'm already there, if there's something I really want to do, I don't want to have to say no because of budget or funds, because it's going to be much more expensive for you to go back in the future. So that's sort of where the buffer comes in as well. And so in case you get yourself in a situation being like, wow, I didn't know that was a thing you can do, and this would be like a dream of mine, you're going to want to do the thing. So that has to come into play in your planning as well.
So true, especially when you're on the ground. Like if you're in Africa and you're like, I can't afford a safari, and then you're there, you're going to want to go on safari. Like it's just going to, yeah. Okay. What about the conversation with your boss?
Yes. I was so afraid. It took me maybe 2 weeks to actually quit my job because I was so afraid of what my boss would say. And it's funny for a couple of reasons, because honestly, decent bosses care more about you as a person than the company. And so like when I finally got the courage to go speak to my boss, I literally slid my letter of resignation across the desk and didn't really say anything. And then he was like, okay, what company are you going to go work for? And I'm like, oh, I'm actually just going to go travel around the world. And he was like, great. I think you should do that. That sounds like a really good plan. And that was it. And so we create these scenarios in our head that people are going to be mad at us, or like we owe them something, and we don't. You know, they would drop you at like a second's notice if it was a business related decision. So we don't need to approach it that way either.
Yeah, that's a great point. Just like, no matter how much people care, and I mean, everybody's got different situations, obviously different bosses or work situations, companies they work for, whatever, but they're paying you for a service that you're providing. And so it's a fair exchange. And if one side doesn't want that exchange anymore because they want to do something else, that's fair. And that works on both sides, right? So it's good. Like you said, it's good to keep that in mind. If they were making a business decision, you know, I mean, I think there's very few people that are indispensable where it's like, if we all were at our jobs and we died, you know, so they would replace us. Mm-hmm. They would find a way to replace us, you know?
Absolutely.
And that's just the reality of it. I mean, that's not a depressing thing. Like you said, I mean, in this context, it can be empowering, right? It's just like, okay, they're going to be fine. I'm going to be fine. It's all good. Right.
And then it's also a really good opportunity, you know? Don't burn the bridge and it's an opportunity to basically just like have a solid goodbye. If you give plenty of notice, if you offer to help in the transition, the door could be open for you when you come back if you wanted it to be. So it's not necessarily a goodbye forever. It's really use this opportunity. And I always say, like, I've had old bosses call me up to be like, hey, what are you up to nowadays? Like, this is a project we have going on. So you never know what your future might look like. So do it well. I always say, like, quit well, offer to be helpful, give notice, and you never know what opportunities might present themselves in the future as well.
That's great advice. It's another reason why I think your list of 5 things, if you go through the exercises that you mentioned and you have your why, and you understand a bit more about the whole intention behind it, it's probably a lot easier to write that resignation letter, to have the conversation when you really understand kind of where you're coming from. And then also, if one of your goals is to maybe come back to the job, then you know what to ask. You know, you might be asking, depending on your situation, you might realize, hey, I might want to come back to this job. Let me just like make this a part of the conversation. Should I? You could ask like, hey, is it possible to, you know, hold the job for 3 months? Or I took a break from touring once. I haven't really talked about this on the show. This sounds funny because I was doing these promotional marketing tours and I wanted to be an adventure travel tour guide because I thought that would be really cool. And so I said, can I leave this tour and get paid like 75% less and go be an adventure travel tour guide for 3 months? And they were like, sure. And then they found like a replacement for me for 3 months and I got to do it. So you just never know how accommodating people are going to be. You might think, you know, but you just can't truly know until you have the conversation, you know?
Exactly. That's so cool. And that's so important. And that's really the best example. It happens way more than you think, but you'll never know unless you talk about it and ask.
Yeah. And one other tip just from your story that I would pull out of that is that you wrote the resignation letter. And I think that's That's a great thing to do too. Like, even if you're not in the type of job where you need to hand in a resignation letter, perhaps writing one is a good exercise in clarifying all of these things we talked about and then having the conversation. And then if you have the opportunity to hand in a letter or, just write a letter to somebody, it doesn't have to be super formal. Your thoughts are on paper. And if you get nervous or you kind of get clammed up, you could just be like, I'm sorry, this is like scary for me, but I wrote this all down and this kind of explains it a little more. And then you have that where you've communicated it properly. I think that could be really something people could use too. Definitely.
Now we've talked about writing multiple times on this podcast. It really is a helpful tool.
All right. Thank you for covering that. Is there anything else we should cover in terms of career breaks that you think it's important to highlight?
Just to go back to number 2 and the why, you prompted something in my brain, like it gives you context for like why you're resigning and things like that. But it also serves you really well when you're on the road, because something that people don't talk about that much is like, because you're traveling, everyone assumes you're living the high life and it's all rainbows and butterflies, but you're going to have hard days. And having a really solid why when you're feeling down and you're not having anyone you can actually talk to about it because it's all your friends back home who have work and stuff like that, they're not going to get it. So you have this thing to reflect back on and be like, oh yeah, this is a hard day, but in the grand scheme of things, this is why I'm here. This is why I'm doing this. And you can remember that like it too will pass.
What do you think is the number one thing that people, just having this conversation with people, what is the number one fear
about taking
a career break?
I think one of them is like you're throwing away your career. Like you would never be able to get a job again if you do this because you have this gap in your resume.
You think is that still the number one thing, I guess, even after, it makes sense because it's always going to be about, it's the fear of the unknown, right? It's like there's so much uncertainty. And if you knew, if you were somehow able to know for a second, although you wouldn't want to know all the amazing travel experiences you were going to have, you wouldn't want to get those in advance. But like, if you were able to know those, everybody would just be like, woo, let's go. But it's so much easier to see the things you're giving up because you don't know the things you're gaining yet. So that makes sense that would be the number one fear.
Right. And the other one is just the financial aspect about it. People feel really concerned to spend time not actively earning an income.
Right. And that can be scary. But if you have a plan, you don't know where it's going to take you. But if you have a plan, I think that you feel comfortable with, you can get to peace with that. What's going on over at the hostel? Hostels in America, U.S. citizens probably stay more in hostels out of the country than they do in their own country. I definitely stayed in hostels overseas way more than I have ever in the USA even before I was traveling overseas. So do you think, are you seeing mostly foreigners in the hostel?
Yes, it is a majority of international travelers. And we do get domestic travelers. However, it's funny, like anytime I tell people that I work in a hostel in the US, they're like, oh, I didn't know we had those.
Right. Yeah. I'm not sure if I even knew when I first went on my first trip. Do you think they're as established as they are overseas?
So for me, I work for the largest hostel chain in the US, and they are very established. So I think a lot overseas, I've stayed in hundreds of hostels. They're more like one-offs, like mom and pop, like little places that people are passionate about travel and travelers, and they open it. The hostel I work for is enormous. So it's a little bit of a different vibe.
What's it like behind the scenes running the hostel? Because you're the general manager, right?
I am the general manager.
So you get all the dirt. Are you allowed? Come on, it's just us here. You gotta give us a little bit of we all know what goes on in hostels.
Oh my goodness. So I will say every single day I'm like, oh, that's a new problem I didn't know we could have. So that is just like how I've approached work. And it's really good for me and my personality, and just to like, okay, so now the things that like when I first started, I'm like, this is a huge problem. I'm like, oh yeah, here we go again. No big deal.
Well, I mean, you're not going to give us specifics. Give us a story.
So like, it's not as juicy as like, I swear. So there's like weird scenarios that happen. So just being downtown in a city, sometimes you get some unsavory characters who behave in interesting ways. So we had a lovely gentleman throw a brick at the window, but like that's okay. We deal with it.
Right. Okay. That kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's less like juicy hostel stuff that you see abroad. I don't know. It feels like, in Thailand, everyone's on vacation, everyone's behaving badly. We have less of that in Boston and more just like interesting characters.
Yeah. Well, what do you love about being around to the hostel scene? And what do you think? There are some people, and maybe even some people listening to this, that they might feel, oh, I'm too old for hostels. That's only for younger people. And I think hostels are great for all ages. And I've hung out with all ages of people at hostels and made meals together. And I think it's such a beautiful way for travelers to come together and exchange stories and have a little bit of a community where you are. Yeah. What are your thoughts around that?
Yes. Especially at my hostel, I've seen travelers into their 80s. It's probably like the widest age range I've ever seen at a hostel. And I love it so much. And it's so cool. They stay in the dorms. If that feels uncomfortable for you, there's often private rooms. So you can have that bit of privacy while also getting the community aspect of a hostel. And to me, one of the best things a hostel can offer is breakfast, because that's really a cool time to just sit with other people that you wouldn't necessarily normally talk to. You're all doing the same thing. And I've seen a lot of friendships formed that way. And it really warms my heart. It makes me very excited to be doing what I'm doing.
What are some other tips for guests, either, practical tips like for booking or what to bring, or just anything in general that can help a traveler listening?
So for booking, always book direct if you can. That is the best tip. So whether the hostel has their own website or you call them directly, the big online travel agencies take a huge cut from the hostels. So it's especially if you're abroad and stuff, and these are small companies, you want all of that money to go directly to the hostel. And in terms of packing, hostels are shared spaces. So you don't want to bring 3 suitcases and have stuff that's going to be taking up a ton of room. You want to pack lightly. There's probably going to be a locker provided. So you want to make sure all your important stuff is going to fit in there. Bring your own lock. That's necessary a lot of times in hostels. Bring things that are going to make your trip to the bathroom easier, so you're not carrying a bunch of bottles and stuff like that. Bring flip-flops. You're in a shared space and maybe you want to cover your feet in those bathrooms. And just be open to the experiences. I've met incredible people traveling and staying in hostels. I've met incredible people at my hostel now. And people you would never encounter with really cool stories.
And earplugs.
We provide them personally, but yeah, I definitely bring them.
I find it satisfying when people come to visit and you're able to give them an experience that you can tell they enjoy, right? And you're able to share something you love with them. And that's for travelers, non-travelers, right? Like you find a movie you love and you're like, oh, you talk to a buddy that you would love this. You get excited about it. You want to share it with them. And, you being somebody who was raised in Massachusetts and now you work at this hostel and you get to tell people about the things that are around them that they get to explore. For you, how does that feel? Have you learned more about, where you live just because of your job? How is that part of the experience for you working there?
Yeah, I love that question. And it's a huge part of it, because when I reflect on my own travels and the generosity I experienced from local people in hostels and just out and about, I never forget that. And like really every single day, I'm like, how can I pay that back? It's something I think about regularly. And that's the experience I want to deliver to the people staying with us. So, I mean, one of my favorite things to do in Boston is just walk around. And it sounds so boring, but like I'm a walker. That's how I like explore and discover new things. And I share my roots with guests and I'm like, you can do this, this, and that. But also I'm on a mission to discover unique things because I want people to be like, oh, wow, they gave us the coolest insider tips. I would have never done that if I didn't speak to the staff working at the hostel.
Right. So what are a couple of your insider tips for people visiting Boston?
So like, everyone talks about the Freedom Trail and all these historical things. We have a lot of museums. I always point people to something very unique. And so it's called, I don't know if it's called the Maparium or Maparium, but it's this 3-story stained glass globe. And so the traveler in me is really coming out again. And it happens to be in the Christian Science Museum. So that's neither here nor there. But the globe is really cool. And they do like a tour every 30 minutes or so. It's like a 20-minute pre-recorded thing, but you're standing inside this stained glass globe and the acoustics are very interesting. Like you can hear, if you're on one side, you can hear people talking on the other side. And I think that's something very unique to Boston.
You mentioned kind of wanting to pay it forward and give people the experience that you had on the road. Can you think of an act of kindness or a generous act from a stranger or somebody you barely knew that stuck with you from your travels?
Yes, it's almost like to the point where I'm like, I don't know if I'll ever be able to return this kind of favor, but I've had people offer me like their house. Like, oh, you're a traveler, you can come stay at my house. And like, sometimes it's like, you can stay at my house and I live here too. I've been offered someone's guest house and it's just like, it's so kind. It's so unexpected. And it's almost like against the American way to just reach out to someone you don't even know, but they're not from there and just offer them something.
Where did that happen?
In Oman.
Yeah. Wow.
The generosity in the Middle East is unparalleled. So many of my memories and like fond memories of generosity and kindness happened in the Middle East.
Can you give me 3 destinations or places that if you could snap your fingers, you'd love to go back and visit again that you've been?
Yes. So definitely Mexico. I've spent the most time out of the US in Mexico and I haven't been back in over a year and I would go back in a heartbeat. Oman as well. It was one of those special places and I explored the northern part of the country, but I would love to go further south and go more in depth. And then, this is so hard. Probably Indonesia. There are so many islands and I mean, I've been to Bali, but I've also explored other islands and try to avoid like those main hotspots and really get into the places that people don't normally go to.
Thank you on a couple levels. First of all, for bringing these 5 things you can do today to start planning your career break and make it a reality. So that's awesome. And sharing some of the hostel tips and just some props for being on the front lines at the hostel because, as a traveler who stayed at many hostels, and I'm sure a lot of people listening, or whether you're hotels, hostels, whatever, those people at the front desk that help you and kind of guide you and give you the lay of the land, those conversations, Cali, that you have like 100 times a day, you're probably like, here's the map, here's, all the things. But it matters so much to the individual traveler to kind of like get comfortable in where they are and like some of the things to see and the recommendations, everything like that. And I know it's not an easy job, like you're dealing with people all the time. So just wanted to give you some props for that. And thanks to all the front desk workers out there.
We thank you.
Do you want to leave everybody with, I don't know, any food for thought or, a favorite quote or something, a life motto you're living by or a song lyric or anything at all?
Sure. So I will say, if you're having this desire to travel, to take a career break, whatever it may be, if you're having it now, I assure you it's not going to go away until you kind of scratch that itch and give it a go. And so it doesn't need to be a 2-year-long career break. It doesn't need to be anything crazy, but give it a chance, plan for it. Nobody's asking you to quit your job tomorrow, but try and see so that you're not having that regret later on when you're like, oh, I should have done it. Because, I'm so grateful that I kind of took that leap when I did, because I shared earlier, like my dad got sick, for example, and I know that I would have had a much harder time doing that after the fact. So I'm glad that I've already kind of done those experiences and lived them. So basically, don't wait. Give it a go. And I'm happy to help support in any way.
Thanks for sharing. Great call to action there for everybody listening. And of course, travelshifters.com is your website. Anywhere else you want people to connect with you, or is that the spot?
That's the spot. I also have a travel podcast. There's a whole season on career breaks. If you are interested, it's the first season and it's called the Travel Possibilities Podcast.
Cool. We'll link to both of those so people can check it out. And Cali, just want to say thanks again for your time. And let me know if you pass through town here where I live, and I'll let you know if I'm in Boston, and you'll see me at the front desk trying to hit you up for some tips. Thank you so much.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Jason.
Take care. Thank you so much to Cali for stopping by the show and sharing those practical steps to help you get started on your first or next career break today. Exciting stuff. I wanted to share a quick story before I let you go, and then we'll leave you with this quote to live by, one quote that you could definitely live by. I think really ties in nicely with this show. But first, I had a friend, I'm not going to name names, but it's somebody who was taking their own sort of career break over the last few months. And one of the things this person wanted to do was to kind of reassess their career, what they were doing, where things were going in their business, and so on. And I said to her, hey, don't use up all your time and energy during this break, just, replacing one anxiety for another. If you have anxiety about, your career, or some form of anxiety, we'll call it, for lack of a better term, whether it's just you're thinking about it all the time, it's keeping you up at night. Perhaps it's like a loop going on in your brain. Should I be doing this? Maybe I should do something different. And that's just kind of always there. And it's always sort of bothering you in a day-to-day. And you take a break, and then you basically spend your entire break, just having another loop in your head where it's like, oh, I don't know what to do. What am I going to do next if I don't do this? Then, and then you're just kind of like replacing one mental loop or one anxiety for another. I said, just be sure to give yourself some space, go easy on yourself. It's sometimes a lot easier to get the answers you're asking for, in my experience, if you're not asking the question all the time and running the loop in your head. It's like there, but if you just kind of relax and let some ideas and kind of get into the flow and let some things come to you, they will come to you in a natural way, as long as you give yourself the space to do that. And it's easy in this day and age to not give ourselves the space to do that, right? We can distract ourselves with the phones or Netflix or, relationships that aren't good for us or whatever. But if you truly are able to give yourself the space, and you remember to not fill it with a different form of anxiety, and just go easy on yourself, you might be surprised at some of the ideas that will sort of just appear and pour into your head in terms of like what you might want to do next, answering some of those questions. So anyway, I hope that's helpful. I just kind of wanted to share that really quickly, because you never know when this goes out, whose ears it's hitting. And perhaps if some of the ideas you heard today are hitting your ears in a certain way, I hope that you can use them to, do what it is that you may or may not want to do next. And I hope it's helpful. Okay. That's the spirit of this community, right? We're here to help each other out. You can always get in touch, by the way, if I can help you out in terms of a guest you want me to have on, a certain topic you want me to cover, perhaps something you want me to write about in the newsletter, which you can sign up for over at zerototravel.com/newsletter. That's free. Truly is a community-powered show. I like to remind people that, in case you're out there listening, that you are not listening alone, that I just appreciate your presence here. a lot of podcasts you can listen to, and you're still here listening to this one. And that means a lot. And I want to do everything I can to provide value in your life through the show. And so if you have any suggestions or anything, you can always get in touch. You can leave me a voicemail. You can drop me an email. Whatever. Shoot me a video. It's all good. I read them all. Okay. I'll leave you with this quote. I did put it in my newsletter this week because I think it's one of those you can live by. And this one is from Anais Nin, who said, quote, life shrinks or expands in proportion to one's courage. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time. Peace and love to you and yours. Cheers.
This podcast has been brought to you by ZeroToTravel.com. Ideas and advice to make your travel dreams a reality.